Welcome. In this session, we'll analyze the most important GS Paper 3 current affairs from the month of December 2025, strictly aligned with the UPSC main syllabus.
So, are you ready to really get a handle on GS3? Because we're about to break down some pretty complex stuff. New laws, big reports, critical data, and turn it all into clear, simple points you can actually use in your answers. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so here's what's on the docket today. We're going to kick things off with a massive shift in rural employment. Then we'll dive into some major reforms for the insolvency code. After that, it's all about data credibility and market codes, and we'll finish up by looking at how to deepen our financial markets. And of course, we'll wrap it up with some quick revision points and a practice question for you.
All right, first on our list is a really huge change in rural development. We're talking about the government completely replacing MGNREGA, which has been around for, 2 decades? This is a huge deal, and you can bet it's going to be a hot topic for questions.
So the new law, it's a mouthful, is the Viksit Bharat Guarantee for Rozgar and Ajiva Commission, or the VBG-RAMG Act for short. The whole idea here is a 2-for-1. It's not just about giving people jobs anymore. It's about using that workforce to build real, lasting stuff, specifically climate-resilient infrastructure out in rural areas. So basically, you're directly linking paychecks to creating physical assets.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. The key differences. The biggest one, MGNREGA was demand-driven, meaning work was basically a right. The new act is supply-driven, which means there are limits. Now, they've bumped up the guaranteed workdays to 125, which is great, but, and this is a big but, look at the funding. It's now a 60-40 split between the center and the states for wages. That's a total game changer, and it puts a whole new financial burden on the states. Oh, and there's also this new rule about being able to pause the work for up to 60 days when it's peak farming season.
So for your mains answer, what's the critical analysis here? Well, you've got to talk about the challenges. For one, critics are saying this really waters down the whole rights-based idea of the original MGNREGA. That 60-40 funding split, that's a huge point on federalism and how it might strain state budgets. And then you have the practical stuff, like mandatory biometrics potentially excluding people, not to mention the big question marks around data privacy with the new DPDP Act. These are the points you need to hit for a top-tier analysis.
All right, let's shift gears. We're moving on to another super important area of reform, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, the IBC. Now, everyone agrees it was a landmark law when it came out, but a new report from a parliamentary committee is pointing out some pretty serious problems in how it's actually working.
And boom, here's problem number 1, spelled out for you: delays. I mean, just look at that number. The law says a case should be wrapped up in 330 days. But in reality, it's taking an average of 713 days. That is more than double the time. And while all that time is passing, the value of the company just strains away, which kind of defeats the whole point of the IBC. Remember that number? 713 days. It's a killer stat for your answer.
And what's the result of those massive delays? Well, here it is. The recovery rate for the people who are owed money, the creditors, is a pretty terrible 32.8%. Let that sink in. For every 100 rupees they're owed, they're getting back less than 33. We're talking about huge haircuts, and it really makes you question if the IBC is actually working as a recovery tool.
Okay, so how do we fix this mess? The committee has laid out 4 main solutions. First, they say we need to change how we value a struggling company. Instead of just looking at its liquidation value, like what you'd get from selling off all its parts, we should look at its enterprise value, which is about trying to save the business as a whole. Second, pretty straightforward. We need more courts, more judges to handle the caseload. Third, for cases that involve other countries, they suggest we adopt a standard international model from the UN. And finally, let's use some tech, an integrated platform to speed everything up and cut down on those delays.
All right, let's pivot again. Now we're talking about something that's the bedrock of all economic policy, the data itself. And right after that, we'll touch on a big new bill that's set to overhaul our financial market laws. And wow, this one stings a bit. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, just gave India's national stats a C grade in a recent report. That's not great. When a major global institution like the IMF raises a red flag about the quality of your GDP data, it's a big deal. It can shake investor confidence and mess with how we make policy.
So why the C grade? Well, this chart lays it all out. The main problems are, 1, our GDP base here is still stuck in 2011-12. It's totally outdated and doesn't really reflect the economy we have today. And 2, we use this flawed calculation method called single deflation. So the fixes? We need to update that base year pronto. We need to create a proper producer price index or PPI. And this is critical. We need to give the National Statistical Commission some real power, some actual statutory authority to enforce standards.
And right alongside fixing our data, we've got a major legal overhaul. This Securities Markets Code bill is a huge project. Think about it. They're taking 3 ancient laws, one from 1956, another from 92, and one from 96, and combining them into one single, modern rulebook for our entire securities market. The whole point is to clean up the clutter, get rid of the confusing overlaps, and just bring our regulations into the modern era.
Okay, next up, we're going deep into the financial markets, and we're going to look at it from 2 different angles. First, how do we help our companies get the long-term funding they need to grow? And second, how do we make sure that financial services are actually reaching every single person, right down to the last mile?
Now, this chart right here tells you everything you need to know. India's corporate bond market is just 16% of our GDP. Now, compare that to our peers. China is at 38%, South Korea, a massive 79%. We're lagging way behind. And what that means is our companies depend way too much on banks for money, which is risky for the whole system. So growing this bond market isn't just a nice idea, it's a huge economic priority.
So you might be asking, why is our bond market so small? Well, there are basically 4 big roadblocks. First, it's super cautious. Almost all the bonds, like 94% of them, are from top-rated, super safe companies. That leaves no room for smaller, maybe riskier, but still good projects. Second, the rules are too strict for big investors like pension funds. Third, nobody's really trading these bonds, they just buy and hold them, which means there's no liquid secondary market. And finally, the tax rules just aren't as friendly for bonds as they are for stocks.
Okay, let's flip the coin and talk about financial inclusion. The RBI has this index, and our score is 67.0. On the surface, that looks pretty good, right? It shows we've made amazing progress in getting people to open bank accounts. A lot of that thanks to the Jan Dhan Yojana. But, and this is the key point for your answer, that number hides a much bigger problem. There's a huge gap between just having an account, that's access, and actually using it in a meaningful way.
And this right here shows you exactly what I mean by that usage gap. Take women, for example. They hold over half of all Jan Dhan accounts, which is fantastic. But only 28% of them are actually using digital finance. And look at this, nearly a quarter of all these accounts are just sitting there, dormant. A big reason for this? The financial literacy rate is only around 27%. That's the real challenge, that last-mile problem that policymakers are trying to solve now.
Phew. Okay, that was a lot of information, I know. So let's boil it all down. We're going to do a quick-fire revision of the absolute key takeaways, the stuff you can just plug straight into your answers.
All right, here's your cheat sheet. The new Rural Employment Act. The big idea is the shift from rights-based to asset-oriented, and that 60-40 funding split. The IBC, your magic numbers are 713 days for delay and just 32.8% for recovery. Data credibility, the core problem is that 2011-12 base year and single deflation. And financial inclusion? It's all about that gap between access and usage. Got it?
And to wrap things up, I want to leave you with a question to chew on. The kind of thing you might see for 15 or 20 marks. Here it is. From a rights-based safety net to an asset-oriented development model. Analyze the new VBG-RAMG Act in light of this statement. Really think about that shift. What are the implications? What about those fiscal and federalism issues we talked about? This is precisely the level of critical thinking you need for the mains. All right, that's all for now. Best of luck with your prep.